Hey everybody, Grandmaster Ben Feingold here with another lecture on our great players of the past. Today's lecture is sponsored by Samuel. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And I want to wish you a happy birthday, although it's belated. Your birthday was yesterday. So I guess we should have had the lecture yesterday. Thanks, Samuel. Now, we're doing it on one of the most famous, if not the most famous, Italian Grandmaster of all time, Sergio Mariotti. And the reason he's the most famous is, even though you probably haven't heard of him, he was top 100 in the world in 1975, which is pretty good because Italy, between, 1920 and 1980, if you could name Italian chess players, good luck. Even if you're Italian, you probably can't. And he played board one for the Italian Olympic team like a billion times. It says on his Wikipedia page, 72, 74, 86, and 88. I don't know what happened between 74 and 86. That's interesting. And in 1974, he got a bronze medal on board one behind Karpov, who got the gold medal. So that's pretty good. And he's the first Italian player to become a grandmaster, which he achieved in 1974. And Mariotti, unlike a lot of today's players, Mariotti played wild and crazy chess. He played very exciting chess, and he didn't care if he was paired up or paired down. That didn't change his style of play, which is really good for a lecture on somebody most of you haven't heard of, who was top 100 in the world. Now, he was born in Florence, and unlike most of you, I've been to Florence. Go Florence. And unlike over 99% of you, my mother's name is Florence. So I got a lot of Florence going on. That was one of our best trips when we were in Italy. Karen and I, we stayed in Rome. That was our home base. And we did a day trip to Florence where we took a fast train. We did some Florence stuff, little shopping, and we came back that night. So it was like a 18-hour excursion or something. But that was fun. Florence was one of the best parts of our trip. Now, Mariotti played a lot of chess in the 60s and 70s, played in dozens of tournaments, and they say his greatest success was in 71 in Venice, which is in Italy, a Super GM tournament with Walter Brown, Vlastimil Hort, Lubomir Kovalik, and Svetozar Gligorić. Those guys were all top 30 in the world in 1971, and he came in second ahead of the three of them. And that's pretty good because even if you haven't heard of them, 1971, those guys were world class. That was like, for almost all of them, that was like their peak. And that was around the time that Kovalik, I don't want to say he defected. He went from Czechoslovakia to the United States, and he went from one of the best players in Czechoslovakia to one of the best American players, and that was in the early 70s. In 71, I don't know if he played for Czechoslovakia or the US, but I know in the early 70s, Kovalik played in the US championships. And of those four players, I've played Walter Brown several times, and I played Svetozar Gligorić once in 1988. We drew relatively quickly. I had a serious case of young, and he had a serious case of old. So the pairing worked out great. We didn't exert ourselves very much. Anyway, if you look at his Wikipedia, unfortunately, he's 76 years old now. He doesn't play chess anymore. I don't see a picture of him, which is terrible. However, on the advertising for this class, we have a picture of him, so we showed you. Obviously, you can find dozens of pictures on the internet. And they list all the tournaments he played in, interzonal, tying for 10th in interzonal with Spassky, Ullman, and Georgiou, and so forth. So you're going to like his games because he played a lot of crazy games and so forth. Anyway, he has a pretty small Wikipedia. It should probably be bigger for somebody who was so strong. Okay, let's do something. Okay, so the first game is a game he played against Gligorić, and unlike most grandmasters you haven't heard of, he beat Gligorić twice. And I like this game more than the other one, although I did like the other one. And I don't want to show you two Gligorić games, because we've already done great players of the past Gligorić. We've already done that. This is Mariotti. Mariotti's white, okay? And Mariotti played everything. He played e4, he played d4, played knight f3. With black, he played everything. So you couldn't deduct or deduce what the opening would be. And somebody on the internet, for the first time in my existence, said something I thought was funny. And on chessgames.com, where I saw this game, this is a King's Indian, Mariotti always played the most interesting, exciting, good for the spectators. So he played f4. And this is known as the four pawns attack for obvious reasons. White's moved 4 of his pawns to the 4th rank. But somebody on the internet made an excellent joke about this, which I will explain later. I can't tell you now because it'll give it away. c5, d5, this is one of the main lines even today. Bishop e2, could play knight f3 first. Sometimes the bishop goes to d3, but you'll see why he played bishop e2 before knight f3. He took on e6, which is rare, and then he played g4. Okay, so Mariotti wasn't kidding around, and unlike a lot of my previous students, I don't teach chess anymore because I taught a lot of students, and I can't choke on my rage that much. A lot of students of mine, and maybe you yourself, when you're paired up and you're playing somebody better than you, and they're hundreds of points higher than you, some people go into a shell and try to play like passive and solid. And when they play lower rated players, they play like their usual self. Okay, Mariotti didn't do none of that. Mariotti played the 4 pawns attack. Then he played g4, which is already crazy. And then after knight f6 and knight c6, he played h4. Okay, this is like I'm playing 10-second chess. And somebody on the internet said, this isn't the 4 pawns attack, this is the 6 pawns attack, which I thought was funny. So yeah, Mariotti wasn't kidding around. He played to beat you. He didn't play and hope that you would blunder. He wanted to just beat you. And maybe you would blunder because he's beating you. Maybe he puts pressure on you and that causes you to blunder. He didn't play safe. And obviously, Gligorić is a much more famous player than Mariotti, but he didn't care. He played for crushing his opponent, which is good for us. Okay, so Gligorić took the center, h5, d5, Gligorić counterattacks in the center, e5, knight e4. So to me, without doing any analysis, which is my strong suit, I like black a lot because white seems like he's just going crazy. And black has 2 knights in the center, black's castled, black's queen has lots of good squares all over the board. Black has a good center, but Mariotti didn't care. He played to checkmate his opponent. And all that stuff that I said, the reasons that I like black, none of that matters when you get checkmated. All the stuff I said about center squares and active pieces, if you get checkmated, that doesn't matter. Okay, so he took on g6, opening the h file, put it in h. Queen d3, the queen's going to move over to h3 and come down to h7. Also, the knight is attacked by my queen and my knight on c3. And this game reminds me a lot of the famous game, which I believe was played, okay, I want to say 1975, but it couldn't have been. It had to be 78. Man, you guys can look on the internet and find out whether I'm wrong or not. Terrible. In 1978, I believe, in the Olympiad, China, which wasn't good at chess in 1970s, they just started playing chess. They won against the Dutch team. One of their players, Liu Wenzi, sorry about the mispronunciation, he beat Donner in a very similar kind of attack. If you know that game, because I've lectured about that game, or you find it on the internet, you'll notice the similarities between Liu Wenzi and Jan Hein Donner. Okay, and that actually was a Pierce, the other game I'm talking about, where white played bishop e2, g4, h4, rawr. Okay, he didn't play c4, it wasn't a King's Indian. It was pretty similar. Okay, Gligorić played b5 because he has to counterattack against white's kingside attack. That's pretty good counterattack, opening up the center and the queen side, and threatening c4. Very aggressive move by Gligorić. Knight takes e4, b takes c4. He doesn't take the knight, plays a Zwischenzug, b takes c4. Queen goes to h3, as I mentioned. Takes the knight. Now black is a pawn ahead. Black has 6 pawns. White has 5 pawns. Don't worry about the pawn structure because taking pieces and checkmating is more important. Now obviously, white can now play queen h7 if he decides. And also, black can play knight c2 check and win this rook. Okay, so position's completely insane. And that's what Mariotti liked. Queen h7 check. Gligorić played the engine move before they even had engines, king f7. Okay, and Mariotti said, yeah, knight c2 check, I don't care about that. f5, rawr. Okay, threatening queen takes g6 check with a big attack, and f6 and rook h7 and bishop h6 and lots of other hand gestures. E takes f5, takes with the e pawn, so his bishop is participating in the game. Rook h6, threatening queen takes g6 check. Now, there's arguments on the internet about Gligorić's defense in this position. Now, obviously, if you take several engines and put them on this position and then go to sleep and wake up in the morning, you'll know what the evaluation is. If it's 1971 and you're playing over the board with the clock ticking, nobody can figure out what to do. Everybody's a genius when their engines tell them what to do. Some people on the internets thought black should play queen b6, defending the pawn on g6. Okay, but Gligorić didn't do that. Maybe that's better. He played knight c2 check because a rook is a rook is a rook. Okay, king f1, and now he played f takes g4 because his pawn structure wasn't bad enough. He wanted to make it worse. And more importantly, he wants to do something we typically only see in the movies or TV shows. When you watch chess on TV, when somebody puts you in check, you respond with check. In real life, that's very rare. However, that's what would have happened this game if queen g6 check, I can play king g8 check. Okay, and also this rook is still hanging. Okay. So Mariotti played king g2, getting his king out of the f file. Black can't really play king g8 here, so it's illegal. So he played knight e1 check instead of taking the rook, and Mariotti played king h1. So I don't understand the material in this position because I don't have an advanced degree in mathematics, but I believe black is up 3 pawns. Okay, and also, for the most part, white's pieces aren't doing a good job of attacking. These pieces, not so good. And what white would like to do, other than the obvious taking on g6, is bishop takes c4 check, getting another piece in the game. If it was white's move, and white played bishop takes c4 check, I think the game's over. I don't see how black defends against that. That's just completely winning. Also, queen takes g6 check would win, and then bishop takes c4. Play both moves, either order is fine. Okay, but it's not white's move, and the reason Gligorić played knight e1 check was to play knight d3, and now he's crushing this bishop. That bishop isn't participating in the attack. I would argue none of these pieces are, and only the queen and rook are. Just the queen and rook. And Gligorić is like, 2 pieces attacking me, I can beat that back. My knight on d3 is good, e5 is hanging, I'm up 3 pawns. Looks good. Okay, but the position's a mess. It's a mess. Queen takes g6 check, the king has to go to g8. If the king goes to e7, your bishop's hanging with check. Now, when you're playing a higher rated player, a famous player, a candidate, and you have a forced draw and you're down material, some of you would take it. Queen h7 check, queen g6 check, draw by reputation. But no, he played bishop e3, and the point of bishop e3 is to play rook f1 check, which gets more pieces into the attack. Bishop on e3 stops knight f2 check also, puts pressure on this pawn if the knight moves away. It blocks the e pawn, so there's no e3, bishop b7 check. So bishop on e3 is pretty good. Queen e7, rook f1 check, king e8 obviously, queen g6 check, rook f7, queen c6 check. Now, when I was analyzing this game earlier, before the lecture, I was thinking, white's going to take that rook on a8 and white's up a rook. That's what I was thinking. Thinking isn't my strong suit. Problem is, if it's black's move, black can take this rook, and if I take back with the bishop, queen h4 check is pretty annoying. So I forgot my rook was hanging, and I forgot my king was exposed. So Mariotti has some issues taking the rook on a8. Okay, so queen d7, he says take my rook on a8, and he plays rook e6 check. Okay, so now the game is a bigger mess. Everything's attacked and pinned. I'm very confused. Black is up 2 pawns, which obviously doesn't matter. What matters is whose pieces are more aggressive and are doing more, and the answer is white. White's queen is aggressive, black's queen is passive, white's rook is aggressive, this rook is aggressive, this rook is passive, and my knight on g1 actually does a good job defending my king, which you're going to see later in the game. In fact, the knight never moves. Why move a knight if you don't have to? Okay, he played king f8, always play king f8. Now, if I take this rook, my rook on e6 is hanging. So he played bishop takes c5 check. If I was if I was black, I would be tempted to play king g8. But I understand knight takes c5, getting rid of one of the attacking pieces. I'm assuming after king g8, without using an engine, which means I'm wrong, that white could play either rook d6 or queen takes a8, or even queen takes queen, or even rook takes rook. I don't know. I got nothing. I think rook takes rook is strong because if king takes rook, rook e7 check seems really good. If queen takes rook, I can play rook e8 check, and all of your pieces are hanging on the 8th rank, which is good. And if you play queen takes queen, I could play a Zwischenzug, or I guess since Mariotti's playing an intermezzo, rook g7 check, and then white's up a piece for 1 pawn. So pretty good for white. Okay, so Gligorić didn't do that. He played knight takes c5. He took the bishop. Queen takes c5 check. King g8. Black has the 2 bishops. White has the vatals. Rook to d6, attacking the queen. Queen b7, getting on this diagonal with the white king. Rook takes, king takes, bishop takes c4 check. Obviously, if you play queen takes, thinking it's safer, bishop takes c4 makes it not safer. And all of a sudden, white's pieces have come to life. Okay, so he took it with the king, bishop c4 check, king goes back to e8, setting up for the next game. Bishop d5 with a skewer. Queen e7, the queen's coming to h4. Queen c6 check, queen takes a8. And even though finally Gligorić gets counterplay with queen h4 check, because the white knight is on g1, king g2 is perfectly safe. The knight is stopping queen h3 check, the only check. This bishop is pinned. The king is getting checkmated on f8, because the bishop on d5 keeps it in there. And white's up a rook. So in this position, Gligorić resigned. So a totally wild and crazy game showing you don't have to play engine moves and play perfect to win a chess game. Sometimes you can make the game super complicated to your liking. Some people, like maybe trying to learn, likes these super complicated, tactical, both sides getting checkmated games. And if you enjoy that and your opponent doesn't, you can beat a lot of higher rated players. And Mariotti was known for sort of wild and crazy play. Okay, next, next, get this guy out of the way. Okay, now Gligorić is pretty famous, and some of you have heard of him, especially if you watch my videos. Here's somebody you heard of, even if you don't watch my videos, Viktor Korchnoi. Okay, this is Mariotti versus Korchnoi, and Mariotti has white. He plays e4. Again, he doesn't just play one opening, he plays whatever he feels like playing. Korchnoi plays e5. Korchnoi also plays a lot of different openings. Knight c3, the Vienna, knight f6, g3. And probably more common than g3, especially now, is f4, and bishop c4 is pretty common also. But g3 is also a move. Bishop b4, bishop g2. And in this game, we see something very interesting with Korchnoi moving his bishop early to b4 and trading off his bishops. We actually see a 2 bishop versus 2 knight game, again, with a very unusual pawn structure. So let's get to the middle game. Korchnoi takes the center, d4, e takes d4. I think typically e4 is a more common idea than taking on d4. Knight takes d4. Korchnoi messes up Mariotti's pawns, although Korchnoi's pawn on d5 is weak. The bishop has the excellent g5, a3, f4 squares. Knight on d4 is good. So white's position looks good, except for his messed up pawns. Knight b d7. That way, if bishop g5 happens, the knight's defended by another knight. So you just play h6. White doesn't really have a good response. So he plays bishop f4. Knight b6. Knights are usually good in front of doubled isolated pawns. A lot of the players from 50 to 100 years ago taught us these things without even saying them. We just see the games and we're like, okay, obviously if a knight is here, it can't get kicked out by a pawn, and it's really well placed in white's territory. So Korchnoi plays knight b6. Knight b5. Here comes Mariotti. His knight and his bishop are both controlling c7 and d6. This makes sense because white has a dark squared bishop and black doesn't have a dark squared bishop because black ruined white's pawns by giving it up. So white's trying to take advantage on the dark squares. Black doesn't really have good defense of those. Bishop f5, developing his last minor piece. Knight d6, attacking the bishop. Bishop e4. He's trying to get rid of Mariotti's beautiful bishop on g2 or his beautiful knight on d6. Obviously, never play f3. That would really make your bishop on g2 look silly. So he played bishop h3, making sure he keeps his good pieces, and his knight is still on d6. Good knight. Knight c4, as advertised. Knight takes e4. Knight takes e4. We have 2 bishops against 2 knights. I would argue black's pawn structure is better, although black does have an isolated d-pawn. White has a lot of isolated pawns. And obviously black's knights are excellent. On the other hand, 2 bishops, what else? So it's a very dynamic position, one to the liking of Korchnoi and Mariotti. This is the kind of position they're looking for. Not some boring draw or not some game where white's slightly better and black's equalizing. Something where you're not really sure who's better. Queen d4. The queen can't get kicked out of d4. It defends the c3 pawn. Queen a5, attacking the c3 pawn. Rook e1. Now, if we take with the queen, we could take on d5 with the white queen. And so he played rook e8, defending his knight in the center some more. Bishop f1, always play bishop f1. If it's white to move, bishop takes c4 wins a piece because the d5 pawn is overworked, defending too many pieces. Knight a3 with the obvious threat of knight takes c2, which is winning. Bishop d3, defending the pawn. Rook e6, he's going to double up on the bubble up. Never play f3, kicking the knight. Knight c5, bishop f5. And in this position, it's very confusing because it looks like my bishop's attacking your rook, because it is. On the other hand, my bishop's defending c2, so black could play knight takes c2 if white plays bishop takes e6. That's too complicated for me. That's why I wasn't playing this game. When this game was going on, I think I was about 1900 at chess, so I would just blunder with both sides. Okay, he played rook f6, attacking the bishop on f5. Queen takes d5, defending the bishop and winning a pawn. Queen takes c3, getting his pawn back. White's bishops look pretty good. The knights look a little strange on a3 and c5. Rook a d1. If you play bishop e5, which looks like it's a skewer because it's a skewer, I guess rook takes f5 would put an end to white's dreams, pinning the bishop to the queen. So he plays rook a d1 because the rook's good on d1. And black sacrifices the exchange. Always sacrifice the exchange. Now in this position, if it was white's turn to move, the aforementioned bishop e5 would be good. Then rook takes, bishop takes queen, and we can see why Mariotti played rook a d1, because let's play a silly move like Yasser would do. Because after rook a d1, our rook is defending on d5, and white's up the exchange. Yes.
I have a question.
I have an answer.
So, back when the rook was on e6 a few moves ago, and you were talking about the threat of the bishop attacking, what was wrong? What was wrong with just taking the rook on e1 there?
Okay.
And then
the bishop defends the pawn. The bishop defends the pawn.
The bishop defends the pawn.
I knew what your question was even before you asked it.
See?
Yeah.
I already saw it there.
I knew what your question was. Yeah. It's hard to see bishops retreating, especially when they just move forward. Yeah. That's why he played rook f6. He's like, play bishop h3 so I can play knight takes c2. But he defended his bishop. Okay. So in this position, Korchnoi sacked the exchange. Rook takes f5. And then he played knight takes c2. So he has a pawn for the exchange. He's attacking the rook on e1. f3 is weak. And my knights are really good in the center. And he got rid of white's two bishops. More importantly, he sacrificed the exchange. Bishop e5. Mariotti plays for the attack. Mariotti doesn't say, I'm up the exchange for a pawn. It's time for my technique to set in. That's not how Mariotti played chess. Mariotti played chess like this. Roar! That's how Mariotti played chess. So he played bishop e5 attacking the queen, and when the queen moved away, he sacked his bishop. Mariotti doesn't say like, well, I'm up the exchange, and I'll play some accurate moves, and things are going to work out. He says, I'm going to sack and I'm going to checkmate Korchnoi because Korchnoi's pieces aren't defending his king. Obviously, if black doesn't take the bishop, then that's bishop takes g7 is a good move. So we have to take. Then he plays rook d8, threatening, rook takes, f8 checkmate. The truth hurts. Black played a pretty good defensive move, knight d7. That defends his rook. And Mariotti said, I got two rooks, one for each of you. Rook e8. So even though black is up two pieces for a rook, black's pieces aren't really good at defending his king. White has a big attack on the king. And Korchnoi sees a way to defend his rook. He plays queen d4 check, and then queen g7. He says, hey, let's trade pieces, and I'll win the endgame with two pieces for a rook. And Mariotti said no talking. Queen e7. Damn. So you can see Mariotti had a really good style if you were a spectator or a kibitzer. You get to see these really interesting games where he's playing for attack, double-edged, unclear who has the advantage. In those instances, when you have players like that, their wins are really good wins. Some people's wins like mine are sort of boring, okay, but these wins are not boring. King g8. I don't know what another move is. I give up. This defends the rook. Queen takes d7. Now, according to the internet, which I don't believe, Black played a6 and resigned. Now, I believe Black resigned. I believe that, okay, because after rook takes rook, you resign, okay? But I don't think he played a6. I think he just resigned. a6 and resigning makes no sense. So the internet is wrong, maybe. All right, but I mean, that was against Korchnoi, and that was a pretty brutal game. Mariotti played super aggressive, and even when he was winning, he didn't take his foot off the gas. Okay, and the next game is against John Nunn in 1970. And John Nunn, it's possible I've done a great players of the past on him. Possible I haven't. And John Nunn is famous in many realms, not just chess, but in mathematics and problem solving, chess problem solving. This game was played in 1970 when both players were pretty young. And John Nunn is known as a sharp player, likes to calculate, and likes to be in control. He doesn't really want to mess unless he's figured out the mess. If it's messy, but Nunn's calculated everything, that's fine. Okay? But this game was too messy, and I mean, now that Inter Miami is a good team, everything's more messy now. Okay, he played e4, Nunn played e5. And we see a third opening from Mariotti. Bishop c5, very unusual move. And if you like unusual, and again, this is something I talk about in my lectures a lot, which it seems like strong players completely ignore. And I did not when I was playing chess. Maybe that's why I never became a strong player. Certain people like certain kind of games. Okay, like trying to learn, he likes when he's in his prep and he's sacrificing and the engine says he's winning. He likes all that. Okay? He doesn't like when it's boring, he doesn't know who's better, and he's low on time, and he's confused. And Mariotti likes when it's wild and crazy. He likes sharp positions, complicated, confusing. And so I don't like John Nunn's next move because it's against the wrong opponent. If I have white against John Nunn, I'm begging for a draw, okay, and I'm not getting it. And so if Nunn plays this move against me, I'm like, oh, I can't figure this out, I'm too old, okay? And Nunn's older than me, although in this game he's younger than me. It's hard to understand. And Nunn plays the craziest move in the position, which reminds me a lot of the famous Kavalanche game between Eduard Gufeld white and Lubomir Kovalik as black, which was played in like some youth tournament in the 60s. I want to say 68, but it could be that I'm wrong. Then I'll say something else. And Nunn played f5. Now, I'm not saying f5 is a bad move. I'm not saying it's a good move, but he's playing the wrong opponent. Mariotti loves when his opponents play f5. He loves this kind of crazy, weird position. Okay, so he played d4, attacking the bishop. F takes e4. D takes c5. Somehow, this isn't exactly like the game I was talking about, but it's similar with Gufeld and Kovalik. So he took the bishop. White has the two bishops. Knight f6. Bishop g5. Mariotti always plays the most aggressive move. Castles, knight d2. So basically white has the 2 bishops, and black says, I have 2 center pawns, and you have 0, and you have double pawns over here. So again, it's double-edged, it's complicated, it's not clear who has the advantage unless you have your 5 engines running, and your engine says, oh, this guy's better by 0.2. But if you're playing the game, it's very confusing. Okay, queen e8, unpinning his knight. Queen's going to g6, I assume. Knight e4. Knight takes e4. Queen takes e4. Queen h5, attacking the bishop on g5. Bishop goes back to e3. b6. Now, obviously, black doesn't want to undouble white's pawns, but on the other hand, black can't have his pieces sit here the whole game. He's got to move the d pawn or the b pawn, otherwise he just doesn't have those pieces working, and either way you're going to undouble white's pawns. So, played b6. I guess he wants to play bishop b7. Makes sense to me. Rook to d1. Mariotti says, no, you're not going to play bishop to b7 because I'm attacking your d pawn. So your bishop has to stay defending it. I wonder if Mariotti actually said that. Rook f6. That seems very suspicious to me. Okay, so if I was playing a chess game and my opponent played rook f6, I would be like, wow, that looks like a crazy move. Undefends the back rank. He's moving his rook out before developing these pieces. I'm not a fan of that move. Now, again, Nunn was a junior this game, so I give him a break. Castles, makes sense. a6, attacking the bishop. Queen d5 check. Queen f7. Bishop c4. Excellent move, probably overlooked by none. Retreating moves are hard to see. If you don't believe me, you can ask Trying to Learn. Those retreating moves are tough. Okay, now white's threatening any move that wins. Queen takes wins, queen e4 wins, queen d3 wins, etc. So he took the queen, bishop takes check, king h8. And again, so far, white's playing a really good strategical game. White has better pieces. You can see black's pieces haven't moved yet. White has the 2 bishops. Black's king is in the corner. Nobody puts black's king in the corner. And if I had the white pieces, I would seriously consider taking this and then taking on b6. Then I would see rook b8. Then I would be all confused. Okay, Mariotti says attack. My opponent's king doesn't have a lot of defenders. I'm going to attack the king. Okay, I have bishops out in the center. My opponent's position is passive. I have to attack. And this is a move that would not occur to a lot of people. Okay, and it's a big attacking move, f4. Now we're threatening f takes e5. The knight on c6 is pinned. And f4 is going to open the f-file for my rook. And these pieces are not developed, and this knight is pinned. So f4 is an excellent attacking move. Nunn, being attacked as he is, decides to trade all the pieces off. If somebody's checkmating you and you trade all the pieces off, they won't checkmate you. Or so he thought. Although, without an engine, this is where I come in. I don't come in very often. Okay, that's not my specialty, explaining stuff to you. Okay, I let the engine do the talking. However, with no engine, and I never use an engine for these lectures, I can tell you white's winning. I can guarantee it. If the engine says white's not winning, the engine's wrong. Okay, I can tell in positions when somebody's winning, even when it's equal material. White has everything, black has nothing. Okay, and the game ended immediately. Obviously, if an engine was playing black, it would defend perfectly, and if it was playing another engine, it would lose in like 20 moves. But these are humans. He took on f4, rook takes f4, and now black made a move that loses immediately. It looks like the most obvious move. It does break one of my rules, never trade. Now, first of all, white is threatening to win immediately, and there's 2 ways to do it. So I'll play a silly move like Yasser, a5. Okay, I can play rook takes rook, bishop takes knight. You can take my bishop here because you have king g7. So I was wrong as usual with no engine. However, the actual way to win, I thought they both won, is to take on c6 immediately. You can't take with the pawn because of mate, and you can't take with the rook because of mate. So if it was white to move, white would play bishop takes c6 and black would resign. Okay, this indicates to me perhaps black should play bishop b7. That defends the back rank. I can take with the bishop. And I would guess white would have a completely winning position by just taking everything. And black has 4 isolated pawns. White has 0. White's a pawn up. White has the 2 bishops. Okay, so probably an engine would say like +3. Maybe +4 would be my guess. I'm not using an engine, but believe me, I'm close. Okay, so Nunn blundered and played rook takes f4. And again, I want to say Zwischenzug, but Mariotti's from Italy, so he played an intermezzo. He didn't take the rook on f4, confusing the audience. He took the knight on c6. Okay, now white's down the exchange, but white's threatening bishop takes this rook and bishop takes this rook. And if you take the bishop, you get checkmated. If you don't take the bishop, I'm going to take one of your rooks, and I'm going to be up a piece. There's no move here. You'll notice the whole game, a lot when I show Morphy games, I say this a lot. But now I'm going to say it on a relatively modern game, not too modern, 1971, is this rook and bishop didn't move. Okay, and obviously these were junior players. John Nunn got better, but Nunn, Gligorić, Korchnoi, those are world-class, world-famous players. And Mariotti beat them all, and he beat more people too, but we don't have a 5-hour lecture. Pretty amazing, top 100 in the world, Italian champion, Italian junior champion, bronze medal on board 1 in the Olympiad, played board 1 for Italy 4 times, and most of you haven't heard of him. So I hope you're ashamed. The person who shouldn't be ashamed is Samuel. It was his birthday yesterday, and he sponsored the lecture. He wanted to show game of a top Italian player. There's some Italian grandmasters now, not too many, but he was the first. And he played in a style that was really nice to watch. Very combative, very enterprising, liked to attack his opponent's king. And so his wins like this are very crisp, very nice. Taking pieces, making threats, basically overwhelming his opponent. And you can see why we did a lecture on him. He's, you could argue, the greatest Italian player ever. There's a couple Italian GMs today who are pretty good, but they're not winning bronze medals on board 1 in the Olympiad behind world champion. Or maybe they are. No, they're not. No, I'm kidding. Now trying to learn, I think you looked up the Liu Wenzi game, right? With Donner. Or no, from the Olympiad? You probably did and you forgot about it. What's that?
Yeah, I totally memorized that.
Yeah, there you go. I think it was 1978, but could be wrong. Okay, and one of those games looked like that. And if you go to the internet and type in Mariotti's best games, you'll see more games that he won that were quite nice, including another win against Gligorić. He beat Gligorić twice, and typically when I talk about people who weren't considered top 10, top 20, top 30 in the world, which he wasn't, we don't see multiple wins against world-famous, world-class players like Gligorić. But there you go. So he was a very exciting player. He was the first Italian grandmaster, and he's still alive. He's 76, just doesn't play chess anymore. The truth hurts, sort of like me. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to sponsor a lecture, contact my wife, Karen at atlchessclub.com. Thanks again to Samuel for sponsoring the lecture, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.